The night my life changed was supposed to be a happy one. It was my son's wedding night, a night I had waited for, prayed for, and imagined for years. The hall was full. More than 100 guests, laughter, music, bright lights, and smiling faces everywhere. People were celebrating love. Family was gathered, and for a moment, I believed everything was finally right. I stood there quietly, holding my purse close to my side, watching my son, Darren, standing beside his new wife, Monique. He looked grown, confident, like a man starting his own life. And even though my heart felt a little heavy, I told myself that was normal. Mothers are supposed to step back at moments like this. I smiled when people congratulated me. I nodded when they told me how lucky I was. Inside, I felt proud, tired, hopeful. Then Monique walked toward me. Her smile was tight, not warm, not kind, just tight. She leaned in close, so close I could smell her perfume, and said something I did not expect. "Give me the keys," she said. 81st. I thought I heard her wrong. The music was loud. My ears are not what they used to be, so I asked her to repeat herself. "The apartment keys," she said again. Now, I felt my chest tighten. Those keys were not just metal. They were my home, my safety, my independence. I told her calmly, "This is not the time." Her face changed. She raised her voice. People started to look. She said I was selfish, that I was holding on to things I no longer deserved, that I was old and difficult and standing in the way of her marriage. I looked for my son. I waited for him to step in, to say something, anything. He didn't. And then it happened. Before I could take a breath, before I could even understand what was coming, Monique lifted her hand and slapped me across the face. The sound was sharp, loud, clear. The room went quiet. I felt the heat first, then the sting, then something deeper, something that sank into my bones. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall. I just stood there. People stared. Some gasped. Some looked away. Some pretended not to see. My son stood still. That silence hurt more than the slap. In that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. This was no longer just family tension. This was no longer misunderstandings or stress. This was abuse. I turned around slowly. I walked past the tables, past the flowers, past the celebration, and I left. That night, my life split into two parts, the life before that slap, and everything that came after. Before I continue, I want to pause for a moment. Just you and me. No rush, no noise. If you're listening right now, thank you. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for sitting with a story that may touch places in your heart. Stories like this are not always easy to hear. Sometimes they remind us of love, disappointment, or memories we keep quiet, especially when it comes to family. I want you to know, you are not weak. You are not wrong for feeling deeply. You are human. If this story already feels familiar, please know it's okay. It's okay to feel sadness, regret, or even confusion. And if at any moment you feel moved by this story, I gently invite you to like this video. It helps these quiet stories reach people who may need them. And if you would like to hear more real stories about family, love, and healing, you're welcome to subscribe to the channel. There is no pressure, just an open invitation. Now, with your heart open, let's step back in time. Let me take you back to my life before that night, to the sacrifices, the love, and the family I thought I knew. Before that night, I had a life that felt steady, even if it wasn't perfect. I was Evelyn Brooks, 68 years old, widowed for nearly 15 years. I had lived in the same apartment for decades. It wasn't a mansion or anything fancy, but it was mine. Every corner, every photo, every little habit in that space belonged to me. It was familiar, safe, comfortable. My husband, God rest his soul, had passed quietly after a long illness. I had grieved, of course, but I had also learned to live again. I learned that life doesn't stop when loss comes. You keep moving. You keep loving in the ways you can. I spent my days carefully. I had a small group of friends who were more like family. Nora, my neighbor, had been there for me since I moved into this building. Samuel, another neighbor, had always had a kind word and a listening ear. Faith, my longtime friend, called me every week without fail. These people were my lifeline, my quiet support. My son, Darren, was my pride and my heart. From the day he was born, I devoted myself to raising him. I made sacrifices I never questioned. There were long nights awake with him when he was sick. I gave up vacations, comforts, and even my own quiet moments to make sure he had a good life. I taught him how to ride a bike, how to tie his shoes, how to be kind. And when he grew older, I tried to let him make his own choices while still being there when he needed me. I was proud of him. I loved him deeply, in a way that sometimes hurt because I wanted only the best for him. I thought he knew that. I thought our bond was unbreakable. Monique, my daughter-in-law, entered our lives when Darren met her. I remember the first time I saw her. She was confident, beautiful, full of energy. She smiled, and I thought, perhaps she will make my son happy. And for a while she did. They were young. They laughed together. But even then, little things started to worry me. Small comments, subtle digs. Are you sure mom can handle that? Maybe it's time she considered letting someone help her with money. At first, I brushed them off. I told myself I was being sensitive. After all, she was trying to help, or so it seemed. Darren laughed at some of it. You worry too much, Mom, he would say, and I tried not to. I had lived through loss. I had endured grief. I had learned to be patient with the world. I thought I could handle anything. My days were quiet but full. I spent mornings reading, afternoons tending to my apartment, evenings calling friends or preparing dinner. I liked the routine. It gave me comfort. I liked sitting near my window, watching the neighborhood children play. I liked keeping my home tidy, arranging flowers and vases, setting the table just so. These small rituals were mine. They reminded me I still had control over my life. My neighbors often stopped by, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to help with heavy shopping bags, sometimes for advice. I offered my own words when I could. We all leaned on each other in little ways. It was enough. It felt like enough. I had a quiet pride. I knew I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I wasn't known to the world. But I had dignity. I had a life I had built carefully. And I had a son who, until that night, I believed loved me as I loved him. I remember one evening before the wedding. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea. The sunlight streamed in through the curtains. I held my hands around the warm cup, and I thought, I hope this wedding goes well. I hope everyone is happy. I hope Darren and Monique find joy together. I never imagined that within days, that hope would be shattered. I never imagined that the love I had poured into my family could be used against me. I never imagined that my own home, my own independence, could become a point of contention. Even as I prepared for the wedding, I tried to stay positive. I bought a simple dress. I brushed my hair carefully, trying to look presentable but not flashy. I wanted to feel dignified. I wanted to walk into that hall with my head held high. After all, I had done nothing wrong. I had only ever loved my son. I remember the night before the wedding. I could not sleep. I tried reading, tried listening to soft music, tried praying. My mind kept returning to memories. Darren as a little boy running to me with scraped knees, his laughter filling the room. Darren as a teenager, frustrated but still loving, seeking guidance. Darren as a young man, stepping into adulthood. I remembered every birthday, every accomplishment, every quiet moment we had shared, and I thought, this wedding is a celebration of him, of the man he has become, of the family we have built together, even if it has been imperfect. I told myself, tomorrow will be a joyful day. I will be proud. I will be happy. I did not know that the moment I walked into that hall, that pride and hope would collide with betrayal. I did not know that my life would split into two before that night. And after, I did not know that the woman smiling at me across the room would one day slap me in front of everyone I loved, in front of everyone I thought could be trusted. I did not know that this night would mark the beginning of a long fight for my dignity, my independence, and my life. But before any of that happened, before the shock, before the pain, I was simply Evelyn Brooks, a mother, a widow, a woman who loved deeply and who believed her life, her choices, and her heart mattered. And that belief would be tested in ways I could never imagine. After Monique became a part of Darren's life, things started slowly changing. At first, it was subtle. Small comments here and there, little remarks that I brushed off, thinking I was overreacting. You should let someone help with that, she said one afternoon when I was organizing my bills. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried an edge I didn't like. I just worry about you, Mom, she added, like that explained everything. I looked up from my papers and nodded. Politely, I tried to smile. Thank you. But I'm fine, I said, and she walked away. But the words stayed with me. It wasn't always Monique alone. Darren sometimes joined in. You know, Mom, maybe we could take care of some of these things for you, he would say. At first, it felt like care. I appreciated it. I had been managing everything alone for years after all. I thought, maybe they just wanted to help. But over time, the help became a constant presence. Phone calls checking if I had eaten, if I remembered appointments, if I needed anything. Visits that lasted longer than expected. Comments about my memory. Subtle jokes about my age. They called it concern. I called it stress. And still, I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that family cares for each other. I reminded myself that Darren loved me. I reminded myself that Monique had my son's happiness at heart. But then came the first real request. A small loan. Nothing large. Just enough that it should have been easy to give. Mom, can you help with a deposit for the new apartment? Monique asked casually over dinner. Her smile was polite. Darren nodded beside her. I hesitated. I thought about my savings. I thought about my apartment. I thought about how much I had already given over the years. I'm not sure, I said slowly. I'll have to check my accounts. Darren frowned. Monique's smile faltered. Oh, come on, Mom, she said softly. You've never said no before. This is just for us. It wasn't just the money. It was the expectation. The assumption that I would always say yes. The pressure that grew heavier each time. And the guilt. They were masters of guilt. They made me feel like I was being selfish. They made me question myself. Was I being too cautious? Was I being unreasonable? I realized slowly that I was walking on eggshells. Even in my own home, I felt a tension I could not shake. I would check my words, my actions, my decisions. I would ask myself, would this upset Darren? Would this annoy Monique? Even my friends noticed a change. When I spoke to Nora, she said gently, You seem quieter lately, Evelyn. Is everything all right? I wanted to tell her, but I didn't. I didn't want to admit that the people I loved were slowly controlling my life. At family gatherings, the pattern became clearer. Monique would question what I served for dinner. She would suggest changes in how I managed my finances. She would ask about my appointments. Darren would nod along, quietly agreeing, without defending me. And each time, they framed it as concern. I'm just looking out for you, Mom, Monique would say. And if I protested, I was told I was overreacting. I was sensitive. I was difficult. The requests grew more personal. Hand over the credit card. Sign forms I didn't understand. Make changes to my will. Let them manage my property. I would sit quietly, weighing my options. I wanted to trust my son. I wanted to believe in family. I wanted to say yes. But something inside me said no. Even small refusals felt like battles. Monique would sigh. Darren would frown. The air would grow heavy. I felt like a child being scolded for not sharing enough. But I also noticed a subtle strategy. They always framed their words as love, concern, care, and I felt guilty for resisting. I felt guilty for valuing my independence. The fear was quiet. At first, fear of angering them, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing my son's approval. I remember one evening clearly. I had just finished dinner, cleaning up the plates. Monique came into the kitchen, casual, smiling. Mom, why don't you let us handle the taxes this year? It will be easier for you, she said. I paused. I thought about all the years I had managed them myself. I thought about my sense of control, my dignity. I hesitated. I prefer to do them myself, I said softly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Darren cleared his throat. You really should let us help, Mom, he said. And just like that, the room felt colder. I knew then that I was no longer just being asked for help. I was being told what to do. My choices were no longer my own. Every refusal came with judgment. Every helpful suggestion carried an unspoken demand. I started documenting small things. Every request, every insistence, every sigh. I didn't know why at first. I just had a feeling that something larger was building. And that feeling was right. The concern that Monique and Darren showed was slowly becoming control. Every gentle suggestion chipped away at my confidence. Every "I'm just helping" statement pulled me further from my own life. It was subtle, quiet, patient, and I was beginning to realize that I was in danger, even in moments that should have been joyful. Like Darren's graduation or birthdays, I noticed the same pattern. Monique at my side, Darren quietly agreeing. Decisions about gifts, finances, even my health all questioned, all guided by them. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. I tried to believe I was overthinking. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. Something beyond simple family concern. Something deliberate. And yet, I kept hoping that the wedding would be different. Hoping that love would shine through. Hoping that my son would stand with me. Little did I know, the night of the wedding would reveal the truth. The control, the subtle intimidation, the manipulation, it would all come crashing into one single moment. After the small signs of control, life began to feel heavier. Every day, little things chipped away at me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, patient. I noticed it first in my own thoughts. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Was I overreacting to Monique? Was I imagining the looks Darren gave? Was I being too sensitive when they questioned my choices? I remember one morning clearly. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through bills. The sunlight came through the window and landed softly on the table. I tried to focus on the numbers, but Monique was there, leaning against the doorway. You sure you want to pay that now? She asked casually. I looked up. Why do you ask? I said, trying to keep calm. She smiled politely. I just worry about you, that's all. I nodded, but inside, my chest tightened. It wasn't concern. It never had been. And then came the next comment. You might forget a deadline, she added softly. Her words were coded with care, but I could feel the pressure, the subtle judgment, the implication that I could not handle my own life. I tried to laugh it off. I'm fine, Monique, I said. But even as I spoke, I felt small. I felt unsure. I felt less than I had been yesterday. The pattern continued. Small criticisms at first, then suggestions, then pressure, then demands. Each time, I felt my confidence slipping. I questioned every decision, every action, every thought. Even my friends noticed. When I spoke with Nora one afternoon, she said, You seem different lately, Evelyn. More quiet than usual. I forced a smile. I'm fine, I said. But even to me, the words sounded hollow. I started keeping notes, little reminders, to myself, things I wanted to remember, appointments, bills, conversations, anything to reassure myself that I was still capable. The requests grew larger. Money, property, decisions about my apartment. Monique asked for small loans, then larger ones. She suggested changes in my will. She wanted access to my accounts. She wanted control disguised as help. And Darren rarely said anything to defend me. Sometimes he would smile tightly. Sometimes he would sigh. Sometimes he would just nod along. It hurt more than Monique ever could. His silence spoke volumes. I began avoiding certain conversations. I stopped mentioning certain things to Darren. I stopped explaining myself to Monique. I tried to preserve what little independence I had left. But each time I said no, guilt followed. They made me feel selfish. They made me feel ungrateful. They made me doubt my own worth, even in my own home. I felt tension. I started walking carefully, choosing my words slowly, watching my tone, worried that the wrong phrase could spark another subtle battle. I remember one evening, I was cooking dinner. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the kitchen. Monique came by smiling. Do you need help chopping those? She asked. I shook my head. No, thank you. I can manage. Her smile faltered for just a moment. Then she said softly, "You might want to be careful with the knives." I swallowed hard. I tried to laugh, but I felt a cold knot in my stomach. It wasn't just her words, it was the look in her eyes, the quiet insistence, the underlying message. You are not capable. You are not enough. I began avoiding some of my friends. It was easier to stay home than explain why I felt anxious around my own family. I started spending more time alone, sitting by the window, watching children play outside, holding a cup of tea and reminding myself that I was still capable, still strong, still human. Sometimes I spoke with Nora on the phone, sometimes with Samuel, sometimes with Faith. They reminded me of who I really was, of the strength I had always carried, of the dignity I refused to surrender. But those moments were fleeting. They could not shield me from the constant erosion that happened at home. I began questioning my decisions, even simple ones. Should I pay that bill now? Should I sign this form? Should I say yes or no to a small request? Even choosing what to eat felt like a decision under scrutiny. Monique's help became a routine intrusion. She asked about my appointments. She reminded me of tasks. She suggested changes to my daily habits. All while Darren nodded or stayed silent, I started writing down conversations. Just little notes in a notebook. Dates, times, phrases, events. I didn't know why at first. I just felt a growing need to remember, to prove to myself that I was still capable. The slow erosion of my confidence became noticeable to me in other ways too. I stopped trusting myself to manage money alone. I started hesitating before making any plans. I started wondering if I was imagining the concern, or if I was truly being undermined. And then came the first major request I refused. It was about the apartment, a suggestion to let them manage it for me. I said no. I felt a quiet strength in that refusal, but it came with fear and guilt. Monique's smile was tight, Darren's silence heavy. The air in my apartment shifted. Even in my own home, I felt watched, judged, controlled. I started noticing other subtle pressures, small hints from Monique about my mental sharpness, comments about my memory, warnings that perhaps I shouldn't make big decisions alone. Even friendly advice carried an undertone of criticism. I felt my independence slipping, little by little, and I realized that it was deliberate, not accidental, not just concern. The quiet manipulation worked. I questioned myself. I doubted my memory. I doubted my choices. I even doubted my love for my own son. And yet, I still hoped. I still believed that the wedding would be different, that Darren would stand with me, that family love would shine through. I remember sitting one evening with my cup of tea. I looked at the photographs on my wall, smiles frozen in time. Darren as a little boy, Darren as a teenager, moments I cherished. I told myself quietly, I have been strong for years. I have faced loss, grief, and loneliness. I have survived. I will survive this too. But deep down, I also felt the fear, the creeping doubt, the erosion of confidence that Monique and Darren had quietly begun. I knew something had to change. I knew that this slow erosion could not continue. I knew that the night of the wedding would be a turning point. And I also knew, even then, that when the moment came, I would have to stand strong. I would have to claim my dignity. I would have to defend my independence. The erosion had been slow, quiet, almost invisible, but it had a purpose, and I was beginning to understand it. The wedding day was bright, warm, and full of hope. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the hall, catching on crystal glasses, silverware, and the flowers arranged meticulously on every table. The air smelled of fresh roses and lilacs. Guests laughed, music played softly in the background, and everyone was talking excitedly about love, family, and happiness. I arrived early. I wanted to have a moment to myself before the chaos began. I adjusted my deep emerald dress. I checked my diamond necklace. I wanted to look presentable, dignified. I wanted to be a proud mother, a supportive parent, a steady presence in my son's life. I remembered how Darren had looked as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees, tears streaming down his face, and a tiny voice saying, "Mommy, it hurts." I had held him close. I had kissed the tears away. I had whispered promises that he would be safe, loved, and protected. Now, he was grown. Now, he was standing at the altar with Monique. I felt pride swell in my chest, but also a twinge of unease. Monique arrived later, radiant in white. She looked beautiful. She smiled at me politely, but I noticed something, a slight edge behind her smile, a tension I could not quite place. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I was being cautious, that this was a joyful day, that nothing could spoil the celebration. As guests arrived, I greeted them quietly. Hello. Thank you for coming, I said repeatedly. Smiles, handshakes, polite laughter. I tried to focus on these moments. I tried to ground myself, but I felt a heaviness settling in my chest. Then came the rehearsal of the ceremony. I watched Darren and Monique stand together. I noticed how Monique guided him with small gestures, how she placed her hand lightly on his back, how she whispered in his ear. I noticed his subtle hesitation. I noticed that his gaze often flicked toward her for approval, and a small voice inside me whispered, "This is not just love, this is control." I shook the thought away. I told myself that I was imagining things. I told myself to focus on the day, on the joy, on the family gathered. Dinner was served. The hall was full. Over 130 guests filled the space with chatter, laughter, and music. I sat quietly at the table, sipping tea. I watched Darren laugh with his friends. I watched Monique move gracefully among the guests. And then she came to me. Monique approached with that polite, tight smile. "Mom," she said, leaning slightly toward me. Her voice was soft, casual, but there was something under it, something sharp. "Give me the keys," she said. I blinked. My heart skipped a beat. I thought I had misheard her. What? I said slowly. "The apartment keys," she repeated, louder this time. Now, I felt my chest tighten. The keys were my independence, my home, my life. I could not give them away. "This is not the time," I said calmly. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hands trembled slightly as I held my purse. Her smile disappeared, and in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Guests were nearby, noticing the tension. I could feel eyes turning toward us. And Darren, he said nothing. Monique leaned closer. "You're being selfish," she said, almost whispering but loud enough for me to hear. "You no longer deserve control over what belongs to me." And Darren, I looked at him, hoping he would speak, hoping he would say something, anything. But he stayed silent. And then it happened. Before I could react, before I could step back, before I could even process the words, Monique slapped me across the face. The sound was sharp, loud, echoing in the hall. I felt the sting immediately, heat rising to my cheek, shock, confusion, pain. The room went silent. People froze. Some gasped. Some looked away. Some whispered among themselves. I felt every eye on me, every whispered judgment, every unspoken thought. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall. I simply stood there. The silence was heavier than the slap, the shock deeper than the pain. Darren remained silent. He did not defend me. He did not intervene. He did not even look at me. I understood then fully that this was not just a family argument. This was a public attack, a humiliation, a betrayal. Monique's eyes were cold. Her smile was gone. She was no longer the polite daughter-in-law. She was a predator. I took a deep breath. I remembered my dignity. I remembered my strength. I remembered who I was. I turned slowly. I walked past the tables, past the flowers, past the smiling faces, past the music, past the laughter, and I left. The walkout was quiet, deliberate. My heels clicked softly on the floor. My head was held high. My heart was broken, but my spirit remained intact. Outside, the cool air hit my face. I inhaled deeply. The night sky stretched above me. Stars twinkled, indifferent to the pain and betrayal below. I realized then that my life had split into two. Before that night, and after. Before, I had believed that family meant unconditional love. After, I understood that sometimes family can be a source of harm. Before, I had trusted. After, I knew I had to protect myself. I called my lawyer, Calvin Reyes. Later that evening, I told him everything, every suspicion, every moment of subtle pressure, every hint of manipulation, every unspoken threat. Calvin listened patiently. He reassured me. He told me I was not alone. He told me that what Darren and Monique were attempting was elder abuse. I thought about my friends, Nora, Samuel, Faith. They had always supported me. I realized I would need them now more than ever. I also realized something else. That night, in front of more than 130 guests, the abuse that had been quiet, hidden, and subtle was now public, and that meant that it could be seen, documented, and challenged. I thought about the videos that would eventually surface. I thought about the truth that could no longer be hidden. I thought about the fight that was about to begin. I walked slowly back to my apartment. I sat in my favorite chair, by the window. I held a cup of tea. I stared outside. The night was calm. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, and I made a decision. I would not let this stand. I would not be shamed. I would not surrender my home, my dignity, or my independence. I would fight. The slap was not just a blow to my face. It was a wake-up call. It was the moment I realized that my life, my choices, my very being, were at risk. It was the moment I understood that the quiet manipulation, the subtle control, and the relentless pressure was a deliberate effort to strip me of everything I had built, and I would not let that happen. I called Nora that night. She answered immediately, sensing something was wrong. "I've been attacked," I said softly. She gasped. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," I said, "but I need your help, and I need Samuel and Faith. This is bigger than me." By the end of that night, I had begun documenting everything. Every message, every conversation, every subtle threat, every piece of evidence that might one day protect me. I also realized that the battle would not just be legal, it would be emotional. It would test my faith, it would test my courage, and it would test my love for the son who had chosen silence over protection. But that night, as I sat in my apartment, I felt something else too, a quiet resolve, a calm determination, a realization that I was not alone. And as I drifted into a fitful sleep, I promised myself one thing: I would not back down, I would not surrender, I would reclaim my life. The morning after the wedding, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy in your chest. I sat in my favorite chair by the window. The sunlight fell softly across the floor. Outside, birds chirped as if nothing had happened. Inside, my thoughts raced. I touched my cheek where Monique had slapped me. The sting was fading, but the weight of betrayal lingered. I took a deep breath. I reminded myself that I had survived worse. I reminded myself that I had faced loss, grief, and loneliness before, and I would survive this too. But this wasn't just a family disagreement. It was deliberate, it was cruel, and it was public. I picked up my phone. I knew I needed help. I needed guidance. I needed allies. I called Calvin Reyes, my lawyer. He answered immediately, his voice calm but alert. "Evelyn," he said, "I saw the messages. What happened?" I explained everything. The slap, the demand for the keys, the silent approval from Darren. Every detail, every fear, every worry. Calvin listened. "Evelyn, this is elder abuse," he said firmly, subtle at first, then escalating. "They are trying to strip you of your rights and property." I felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear because I was facing something I had never imagined. Relief because someone finally named it for what it was. Calvin assured me we could fight back. He said we would gather evidence, document everything, protect me legally, and ensure that my voice would be heard. After the call, I reached out to my friends, Nora, Samuel, Faith. I told them everything, step by step. I shared my fear. I shared my heartbreak. Nora's voice was steady, comforting. "Evelyn, you're not alone. We'll stand with you. Whatever you need, we'll help." Samuel was firm. "This is wrong. You do not have to endure this. We will make sure the world sees the truth." Faith was gentle but determined. "Your dignity is intact. We'll help you protect it." I felt a surge of strength. Even though my son had chosen silence, even though Monique had tried to humiliate me, I realized that I was not alone. I had loyal friends, people who believed in justice. Together, we began planning. We gathered what evidence I could find: messages, emails, bank statements, videos from the wedding. Even small details mattered. Every whispered threat, every subtle manipulation, every moment of pressure. I also realized that the wedding videos could help. Guests had filmed moments on their phones. Some had captured the slap. Some had captured Monique's demanding tone. Some had captured Darren's silent complicity. These videos, if shared wisely, could show the world a truth that Monique and Darren were desperate to hide. But first, we had to be careful. We had to strategize. Monique and Darren were clever. They had spent years building a narrative that I was unstable, vengeful, even mentally unfit. They had convinced some people, even family members, to doubt me. I felt anger rising, but I calmed myself. I reminded myself that anger alone would not win this battle. Strategy, evidence, and support would. We began documenting everything, every conversation, every visit, every suggestion disguised as concern. I wrote down my thoughts each day. I recorded what was said and who said it. I also reached out to other seniors I knew, people who had experienced subtle manipulation or elder abuse. I realized that I was not alone in this fight. Others had suffered quietly, hidden behind smiles, polite nods, and family expectations. We began meeting with Calvin regularly. He explained my legal options. We discussed restraining access to my finances. We talked about documenting harassment. We talked about the wedding guest who had been asked to sign statements against me. I remember feeling a strange mix of emotions: fear, anger, relief, determination. It was overwhelming at times, but I also felt a clarity I had never had before. I understood that this was bigger than just me. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my independence. It was about standing up to subtle, insidious abuse that often goes unnoticed. Nora, Samuel, and Faith became my pillars. They offered not just emotional support, but practical help. They helped me organize documents. They helped me reach out to experts. They reminded me to eat, to rest, to take care of myself. One evening, as we sat around my living room, I felt a sense of calm. "We have a plan," Nora said, holding my hand. "Yes," Samuel added. "You are not alone. You are strong, and we will see this through." Faith nodded. "You will speak your truth, and the world will hear it." I looked at them, my heart full of gratitude. Even though Darren had chosen silence, even though Monique had tried to destroy me, I realized that I had allies who truly cared, and in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would fight, yes, but I would do it with dignity. I would show the world the truth without losing myself in anger or bitterness. I would reclaim not just my home, but my confidence, my independence, and my voice. We also began planning a careful release of information: wedding videos, statements from loyal friends, a narrative that would show me not as a vengeful mother, but as a dignified woman standing up to years of manipulation and abuse. It was empowering. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope, a sense of control returning, a belief that justice could be possible. At night, when I sat alone by the window, I reflected on how far I had come. I had survived the subtle erosion of my confidence. I had faced betrayal and humiliation. I had felt alone, and yet I had found strength. Strength not just in myself, but in the community I had around me, in the loyalty of friends, in the guidance of my lawyer, in the clarity of knowing the truth. I also began to see Darren and Monique differently, not with hatred, but with understanding. They had chosen control over love, fear over empathy, greed over family bonds, and while I mourned the loss of the relationship I had hoped for, I also celebrated the realization that I did not need their approval to stand strong. We made a schedule to document everything daily. Even small details mattered. Conversations at the grocery store, comments at the coffee shop, texts and emails. Everything would build a case. I started writing letters to myself too. Reminders of my worth, reminders of my courage, notes that I could read on days when I felt weak. And slowly, the fear that had weighed so heavily on me began to lift. I felt my confidence returning. Not completely, not yet, but enough to know that I could face whatever came next. By the end of the first week after the wedding, I had begun to see a pattern clearly. Monique and Darren had tried to isolate me, to control me, to manipulate me into giving up what was mine. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the strength I carried. The strength that had carried me through widowhood, loneliness, and life's challenges. And they had certainly underestimated the support I had in Nora, Samuel, Faith, and Calvin. I began to feel a sense of empowerment, a quiet, steady fire inside. I would not just defend myself. I would expose the truth. I would reclaim my life. The days after the wedding were heavy, filled with reflection and quiet determination. I spent hours at the apartment, organizing notes, emails, texts, and photos. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every tiny detail could prove the pattern of manipulation, the slow erosion of my confidence, the subtle threats that Monique and Darren had used for years. I realized that the wedding night had changed everything. It wasn't just a slap. It was the exposure. It was the moment when their manipulation became public. And now, the world could see the truth. Calvin advised me to gather all the videos from the wedding. Many guests had recorded moments on their phones. Some were candid. Some captured the ceremony. Some had captured the confrontation. At first, I was hesitant. I worried about judgment. I worried about the scrutiny of strangers. But Calvin reminded me gently, "Evelyn, this is your story, your truth. The world needs to see it." I took a deep breath and began contacting guests. "Hello, this is Evelyn Brooks," I said softly. "I'm reaching out about the wedding. Some videos might show important moments that could help me." Most were hesitant at first. Some apologized for not helping sooner. Some didn't realize the significance of what they had captured. But slowly, the clips began to arrive. Short clips, shaky hands, but undeniable truth. I watched them one by one. The slap, the demand for the keys, Darren's silence, Monique's tight smile. Each playback made my heart race. I felt anger, yes, but I also felt strength. This was the evidence I needed, not to retaliate, but to protect myself, to reclaim my dignity. Calvin suggested releasing a carefully edited version online. We wanted to show the truth, calmly and clearly. No shouting, no dramatics, just the facts. The wedding, the confrontation, the subtle manipulation over the years. I was nervous. I had never been in the public eye like this. But the idea of standing up, finally, filled me with courage. I remembered the nights of quiet reflection, the support from Nora, Samuel, and Faith, the notes I had written to myself reminding me of my strength. The first clip went live. I held my breath as I watched, and then it began. The views started ticking up slowly, then faster still. People commented, supportive messages, stories of their own experiences, stories of subtle manipulation, coercion, and elder abuse. I read each one carefully. Tears came at first, but then I felt hope. I was not alone. No one was alone in this fight. Calvin called. "They're seeing it, Evelyn. They understand. This is powerful." I nodded, even though he could not see me. I felt a surge of empowerment. The videos showed the world a truth Monique and Darren tried to hide. I was not unstable. I was not vengeful. I was a mother and a woman standing up to years of abuse. Soon, mainstream media began reaching out. News outlets wanted interviews. They wanted to tell the story of the woman who had been humiliated publicly but stood with dignity. I hesitated at first, but then I realized this was bigger than me. This was about awareness. This was about exposing elder abuse. I agreed to appear on a televised program. Live Stories Uncovered called me. They were gentle, professional, and understanding. They wanted to highlight the issue, not sensationalize it. Before the interview, I sat quietly in my apartment. I thought about Darren. I thought about Monique. I thought about the years of subtle pressure, the guilt, the manipulation. I thought about my own strength. When the cameras rolled, I spoke calmly. I told my story from beginning to end, not with anger, but with clarity. I spoke about the wedding night, the slap, the years of coercion. I spoke about the slow erosion of my confidence, the subtle manipulations, the attempts to isolate me, and when the slap happened, I said softly, looking directly into the camera, I realized that I had to protect myself, even if it meant losing my son. The room was quiet. The hosts nodded respectfully. They asked questions gently. I answered honestly, and for the first time in years I felt seen. The video went viral. Millions watched, millions shared, millions commented with their own stories. People wrote about parents, grandparents, and elders who had been manipulated, controlled, and silenced. They thanked me for speaking up. They told me they now felt empowered to protect themselves. I began receiving calls from lawyers, social workers, and counselors. They wanted to support me. They wanted to help others like me. The legal case Darren and Monique had tried to build against me began to crumble. They had counted on the narrative that I was unstable, but the world had seen the truth. They had seen a dignified, articulate woman standing up against manipulation. Their friends and some wedding guests who had been convinced to sign statements against me were now hesitant. They had seen the videos. They had witnessed the truth. And their stories no longer aligned with Darren and Monique's version. I worked closely with Calvin to organize all evidence. We documented everything meticulously: emails, texts, financial records, videos, eyewitness statements. The legal battle became public. But instead of shame or fear, I felt confidence. I was prepared. I had allies, and the truth was on my side. Meanwhile, the support from strangers was overwhelming. Messages from people I would never meet. Stories of grandparents, parents, friends, all facing similar abuse. People shared tips, resources, and encouragement. I realized that the slap, the public humiliation, had inadvertently become a catalyst, a moment that exposed the abuse and rallied others. I also thought about Darren, about Monique. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of truth. They had underestimated the resilience of a person determined to reclaim their life. Months later, the wedding videos remained online, a permanent record of truth. People continued to share them, discuss them, and learn from them. I had become a symbol of resistance, not because I wanted fame, but because I refused to be silenced. The journey was far from over. The legal battles, the emotional processing, the rebuilding of trust and self-worth would take time. But I had taken the first steps. I had reclaimed my voice. I had reclaimed my life. And through it all, I learned an important truth. Elder abuse often starts quietly, subtly, in ways that are hard to recognize. It hides behind concern, love, and polite suggestions. But when exposed, the truth has power. I also realized the importance of allies. Nora, Samuel, Faith, Calvin. People who believed in justice. People who stood by me when my own family failed to do so. And slowly, day by day, I felt the weight lift. I could sleep better. I could smile genuinely. I could walk taller. The public revelation was not just about Darren and Monique. It was about all the people who had suffered in silence. It was about showing the world that dignity, strength, and truth are worth standing up for. I knew the road ahead would have challenges. There would be legal proceedings. There would be public scrutiny. There would be emotional strain. But I also knew that I had taken control. For the first time in years, I was no longer manipulated. I was no longer silenced. I was no longer afraid. And that realization, more than anything, brought me peace. The days after the viral videos were chaotic. Not with noise or chaos in my apartment, but in my mind. Phone calls, messages, emails, and inquiries flooded in. Some were from people who had experienced elder abuse. Some were from journalists. Some were from strangers who just wanted to say, "Thank you." I read each message carefully. Tears came at first, but soon, a quiet sense of pride settled in. For the first time in years, I felt seen, heard, believed. Calvin called early one morning. "Evelyn, we're ready to proceed," he said. I felt my stomach tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation. Finally, the work I had been doing, the documentation, the evidence, the careful planning, it was about to pay off. The first hearings were tense. Monique and Darren's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable. They brought in witnesses who had been convinced to question my judgment. They implied that I had ulterior motives, but the videos told a different story. The wedding footage, candid and unedited, showed my dignity. It showed the slap. It showed the silence of my son. It showed the manipulation that had been hidden. For years, Calvin presented each piece methodically. Emails, messages, financial records, photos, witness statements. He explained the patterns, the slow erosion of confidence, the coercion disguised as concern. I watched from the courtroom bench. I stayed calm. I breathed deeply. Each word Calvin spoke strengthened me. Each piece of evidence validated my experience. The judge listened carefully. I could feel the shift. The weight of truth pressed down in the room. And slowly, the narrative Monique and Darren had tried to construct began to crumble. Outside the courtroom, supporters waited. Friends, neighbors, people who had reached out online. They waved and smiled as we left the building. It felt strange, surreal. I realized how many people were rooting for me, believing in my story, standing alongside me even from afar. Darren called my phone a few times during this period. I did not answer. Monique sent messages demanding my attention. I ignored them. I realized something important. They had tried to isolate me, but I was no longer alone. I had allies. I had evidence. I had truth on my side. Weeks passed, filled with hearings, meetings with Calvin, and interviews with witnesses. It was exhausting, emotional, but it was necessary. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. I sat quietly in the courtroom. My hands rested on my lap. I focused on my breathing. The judge spoke slowly, clearly, deliberately. He recounted the evidence, the wedding videos, the pattern of manipulation, the subtle abuse, the attempts to seize my property, and then he spoke the words I had longed to hear. Darren and Monique Brooks have failed to prove any claim of incompetence or instability. The court finds in favor of Evelyn Brooks. They are ordered to pay all legal fees and restitution to the plaintiff. I felt a release. A weight lifted from my chest. I exhaled slowly. The room seemed to shimmer with relief. Monique gasped. Darren looked stunned. Their carefully constructed plans lay in ruins. I sat quietly, dignified, calm. Finally, justice had been served. Outside the courtroom, cameras and journalists waited. I walked past them, confident, serene. I spoke clearly, calmly. For the first time in months, I want people to know, I said softly, that elder abuse doesn't always start with violence. It starts subtly, quietly, disguised as love, care, or concern, and it can happen to anyone. But there is hope. There is a way to stand up and protect yourself. The story went national. The viral wedding videos had already captured public attention, but now, the legal victory amplified it. People across the country shared my story. They reached out with support, encouragement, and gratitude. Back at home, I reflected on the fallout. Darren had lost his job. Monique's attempt to start a business collapsed under public scrutiny and lost credibility. They were left to face the consequences of their actions. But more than that, I realized how much I had gained. Not money or material things, not recognition or attention, but dignity, peace, the power to reclaim my life on my terms. I also began to process the emotional consequences. The realization that Darren had chosen silence, that he had prioritized his wife over his mother, was painful. But it was a lesson in clarity. I understood now that love does not mean tolerating abuse. It does not mean ignoring manipulation. It does not mean surrendering your life or dignity for the comfort of others. Nora, Samuel, and Faith became my anchors. We celebrated the victory quietly, a small gathering, just us. We toasted to truth, justice, and resilience. I'm so proud of you, Nora said, holding my hand. You didn't just fight for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's been silenced. Samuel nodded. You've turned pain into power, and courage into inspiration. Faith smiled softly. The world needed to see this, and now they have. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from sadness, but from release, from recognition of the journey I had taken, from gratitude for the support I had received, from hope for the future Even Darren reached out after the verdict. 3 calls in 2 years, all asking for money, never for apology, never acknowledging the harm done. I did not respond. I had realized that some relationships cannot be repaired until accountability is taken. And for now, I would protect myself. I would protect my independence. I would protect my peace. I also thought about the future. The lessons I had learned could help others. The Evelyn Brooks Foundation began to form in my mind. A way to help seniors reclaim their finances, their homes, and their self-worth. A way to educate, empower, and protect. I began drafting plans. I reached out to lawyers, social workers, and counselors. I gathered a team that shared my vision. I wanted to ensure that no one else would feel as powerless as I once did. Through the legal victory, I discovered a strength I had never fully known, a quiet, steady resilience that no amount of manipulation could break. I realized that standing up for yourself is never too late, that dignity once lost can be reclaimed, and that peace once surrendered can be restored. The fallout in my family was still painful. Darren had made his choices. Monique had made hers. But I no longer needed their approval. Their actions no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my life. I had reclaimed my voice. And in doing so, I had inspired others to do the same. The legal battle was over, but my journey was far from finished. I had my life back, my dignity restored, and my independence intact. But I knew that so many others were still struggling in silence. So many seniors quietly manipulated, coerced, or abused, without a voice to defend themselves. I thought about my own story, the subtle manipulations, the guilt, the pressure disguised as concern, the slow erosion of my confidence. I realized I could not let this remain just my story. It needed to become a tool, a lesson, a beacon for others. And that's when the idea came to me. The Evelyn Brooks Foundation for Senior Protection. I began writing down plans. I listed what I wanted to achieve: education, support, legal assistance, advocacy. I wanted seniors to know they had rights. I wanted them to understand that being polite or compliant did not mean they were weak, that standing up for themselves was not selfish, that protecting their dignity and independence was not shameful. I called Nora first. "I need your help," I said. She smiled, though I couldn't see it over the phone. "Of course, Evelyn. Whatever you need." Samuel joined next. "Count me in. I've seen too many people taken advantage of, and I won't stand by." Faith added softly but firmly, "We can educate. We can reach people who never thought they had a choice. Together, we began shaping the foundation. We researched elder abuse laws, legal rights, and financial protections. We spoke to lawyers, social workers, and counselors. We identified gaps in support systems and designed ways to fill them. The first step was outreach. I wanted seniors to know they were not alone. We created information pamphlets, simple, easy to read guides on protecting finances, identifying manipulation, and seeking legal help. We held small workshops in community centers and churches. We invited seniors to share their experiences in safe, private spaces. The response was overwhelming. People came quietly at first, hesitant, shy, but soon they began opening up, sharing stories of adult children who had pressured them, neighbors who had exploited their kindness, friends who had slowly manipulated them into giving away property or finances. I listened to every story, sometimes with tears, sometimes with quiet nods, sometimes with anger, but always with empathy. One woman shared how her grandson had convinced her to change her will. Another spoke of a niece who had isolated her from friends, claiming concern for her health. Each story reminded me why the foundation existed. Each story fueled my resolve. We also started a legal support program. Volunteers helped seniors review contracts, understand legal documents, and recognize exploitation. Calvin offered his expertise pro bono. Other lawyers joined. Inspired by the public response to my story, we provided counseling too, not just for financial or legal matters, but for emotional healing. Many seniors had endured years of subtle abuse. They felt guilt, shame, and fear. Our counselors helped them rebuild confidence, to set boundaries, to say no without fear, to understand that their lives, homes, and assets were theirs to protect. As the foundation grew, I began speaking publicly. Interviews, talks, panels. I shared my story, always calmly, always truthfully. The focus was not revenge, but education and empowerment. People often asked, "What gave you the strength?" I told them simply, the slap was the turning point. It made me realize that I had to protect myself, even if it meant losing people I loved. I also made a decision about my family. Darren reached out a few times, asking for money. I did not respond. I realized that helping others did not mean returning to manipulation. It meant standing firm, protecting my own peace, and providing guidance for those truly in need. The foundation grew steadily. Samuel became vice president. Nora led educational programs. Faith coordinated outreach and support groups. We developed online resources, webinars, and community newsletters. We created a safe space for seniors to share anonymously and seek advice. And slowly, we saw impact. Hundreds of seniors received guidance to reclaim property, protect finances, or confront subtle manipulation. Some reunited with estranged family members after setting firm boundaries. Others reclaimed their homes or regained control over their finances. Every success story reinforced our mission. I also wrote a book, When Love Hurts. Simple, heartfelt language, stories of abuse, resilience, and empowerment. I donated all proceeds to the foundation. It became a tool, a way to reach even more people. My health improved as well. Stress and fear had weighed heavily on me for years. Now, I slept better. I walked taller. I laughed more freely. And I felt younger than I had in decades. Even Darren and Monique remained distant. Monique's business venture collapsed. Darren lost jobs and opportunities. But I did not celebrate their misfortune. I focused on what I could control: my life, my work, my mission. We also began mentoring seniors on leadership and advocacy, teaching them to spot abuse, teaching them to protect themselves, teaching them that dignity and independence were worth fighting for. I remember one workshop vividly. An elderly man quietly said to me, "I thought I had to obey my children to be loved. I didn't know I had a choice." I squeezed his hand. "You always have a choice," I said. "And choosing yourself doesn't mean choosing hate. It means choosing peace and respect." These were the moments that made all the pain worthwhile. The moments that reminded me why I had endured the legal battles, the public scrutiny, the heartbreak. It was not about revenge. It was about transformation, empowerment, hope. 6 months into the foundation, we opened our first center, a welcoming space with a small library, consultation rooms, and a community room for workshops. We hosted weekly meetings where seniors shared experiences, received advice, and learned about rights and protections. The energy in the room was palpable. Hope, courage, and relief mingled in every conversation. The foundation also began collaborating with lawmakers and advocacy groups. We pushed for stronger legal protections for seniors, for clear definitions of manipulation and coercion, for resources and support for those who had been isolated and silenced. I traveled occasionally to speak at conferences, not for fame, not for recognition, but to educate, to prevent abuse, to empower others to stand up, just as I had. And slowly, I began to see the ripple effect. People shared their stories, neighbors checked in on elderly friends, families became more aware of subtle abuse patterns, and the conversation about elder abuse became more public, more informed, more urgent. Through it all, I remained grounded. I still had quiet mornings by my window, still reflected on my journey, still remembered the pain, the betrayal, and the moment the slap changed everything. But now, I also remembered the resilience, the allies, and the lives we were changing. The foundation had become a symbol of hope, not just for me, but for countless seniors reclaiming their independence, dignity, and peace. And I realized something profound. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest purpose. Sometimes the pain you endure becomes the power to help others. Sometimes the love you thought was lost transforms into guidance, protection, and empowerment for those who need it most. And in that knowledge, I found my own peace, not in revenge, not in anger, but in empowerment, in justice, in helping others reclaim their lives.
After months of legal battles and foundation work, I began to feel a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. The whirlwind of courtrooms, viral videos, and interviews had finally settled. I had survived humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak. But now, I had a new mission: to rebuild my life and create a lasting legacy. The first mornings of this new phase were quiet. I made tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the neighborhood I had called home for decades. The sunlight streamed through, casting warm patterns on the walls. I breathed in slowly, savoring the moment. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, but rebuilding wasn't just about peace. It was about action, about creating structures, routines, and purpose. I decided to dedicate more time to the foundation, but also to myself, to my health, to my relationships with loyal friends, and most importantly, to mentoring seniors in the community. Samuel became my right-hand man in running the foundation. He was steady, compassionate, and meticulous. Together, we developed programs for financial literacy, elder rights, and self-defense against coercion. We also started a series of webinars allowing seniors across the country to join from home. People who had been isolated suddenly had access to resources and guidance. The feedback was overwhelming. One day, a woman named Lillian came to our center. She was timid, hesitant, and carried herself as though she had been beaten down by life. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," she whispered. I reached out, gently taking her hand. "You are," I said softly. "You've already taken the first step by asking for help." Stories like hers reminded me why I had fought so hard. The legal victory had been meaningful, yes, but that was transformative. Helping someone reclaim their confidence, their autonomy, their life, this was real impact. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild my personal life. I reconnected with neighbors I had lost touch with. I spent quiet afternoons with Samuel and Nora, laughing and reminiscing. I started gardening again, feeling the soil in my hands and watching life grow before me. Even Darren, my son, remained distant, but I no longer obsessed over his choices. I had learned that some relationships could only heal if accountability was taken, and that healing for me came first. I also dedicated time to writing. When Love Hurts, my book, became both catharsis and outreach. I wrote in simple, honest language. I described manipulation, subtle abuse, and recovery. I shared my own story, not to shame anyone, but to empower readers to recognize patterns in their own lives. I donated all proceeds to the foundation. It was important to me that every word contributed to something larger than myself. Workshops became more sophisticated. We invited legal experts, financial advisors, and mental health counselors. Seniors came with questions, fears, and stories. Some were tearful at first, some were angry, some were hesitant, but each left stronger, armed with knowledge, resources, and courage. I recall one workshop vividly. A man named George shared how his daughter had slowly pressured him into changing his will. "I thought it was love," he admitted, voice trembling. I held his hand and said gently, "Love never forces control. It respects boundaries. It values dignity. You are not wrong for standing up." Moments like this reminded me why every battle, every sleepless night, every tear had been worth it. This was no longer just my story. It had become a movement. The foundation also expanded into legal advocacy. We helped seniors contest unfair contracts, recover property, and challenge coercion in court. Many were initially afraid of legal action, but when they saw the support network, the expertise, and the community, they gained courage. At home, life became balanced. I spent mornings with paperwork and workshops, afternoons in reflection or quiet hobbies. Evenings were for friends, music, or a book. I realized that rebuilding a life wasn't just about action, it was also about finding moments of joy. Public recognition came slowly. News outlets began calling me for interviews, panels, and talks. I accepted selectively, focusing on opportunities to educate rather than to be in the spotlight. When asked about my journey, I always spoke calmly. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, about empowering not just myself, but anyone who has felt powerless. Sometimes, Darren tried to reach out. Most of the time, I did not respond. It was a conscious choice. I had to protect my boundaries, my independence, my peace. Love does not mean tolerating abuse, and I had learned that lesson well. Friends like Nora and Samuel reminded me that family could extend beyond blood. These were people who had believed in me, supported me, and fought alongside me. Their loyalty, trust, and empathy were invaluable. I also began mentoring other women my age, teaching them to recognize manipulation, reclaim control over their finances, and advocate for themselves. Some had endured years of quiet coercion. Some had been isolated or silenced. Watching them gain confidence, stand taller, and speak with authority reminded me of my own journey. It was empowering, not just for them, but for me as well. The foundation also began partnering with community centers, legal clinics, and local governments. We created educational programs in neighborhoods, churches, and senior living communities. People learned their rights. They learned to recognize exploitation. They learned to act before it was too late. And slowly, my story became larger than myself. It became a symbol, a message, a reminder that age does not diminish strength, that dignity and respect are non-negotiable, and that standing up, even when it is hard, is always worth it. In private moments, I reflected on how far I had come. I remembered the wedding night, the slap, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. And yet, I also remembered the resilience, the support, and the courage that had carried me through. Life was not perfect. Some family relationships remained distant. Some people remained estranged. But I had learned that peace comes not from forcing reconciliation, but from protecting one's own life and integrity. I also began planning a documentary series, a chance to educate a wider audience about elder abuse, to highlight the subtle manipulations that often go unnoticed, to show that recovery, empowerment, and dignity are possible. Each day, as I worked, I felt gratitude for the legal victory, for loyal friends, for the seniors whose lives we were touching, for the opportunity to transform personal pain into purpose, and through it all, I maintained a sense of humility. I did not seek fame or praise. I sought only to do good, to educate, and to empower, to turn my story into a legacy that would protect others. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I would sit by the window, thinking about the years ahead. I realized that rebuilding life was not just about surviving, it was about thriving, about living fully, with purpose, and with compassion, about creating structures that would outlast me, protect others, and foster dignity for generations to come. And in that quiet reflection, I felt a sense of fulfillment, not from recognition, not from accolades, but from knowing that I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my purpose. I had survived betrayal and abuse. I had stood up for myself, and I had created something lasting, something bigger than me, a foundation, a movement, a legacy, and in that legacy, I found peace, I found joy, I found strength, and I knew that the hardest moments of my life had given rise to the most meaningful ones. Now that I look back on everything, I realize how much life has taught me. The pain, the betrayal, the loss, even the heartbreak of my son's choices, all of it shaped the woman I became. I have learned that love is not always gentle. Sometimes, love hides behind control. Sometimes it masks greed or selfishness. And sometimes it tests your courage. It tests your boundaries. It tests your strength. But I have also learned that courage is not loud. It is quiet. It is steady. It is the calm voice inside you saying, I will not surrender my life to fear or manipulation. I learned that dignity is priceless. Not money, not possessions, not recognition. Dignity is the quiet knowledge that you are worthy, that your life is yours to live on your terms, and that no one can take it away without your permission. I have learned that family can hurt deeply, that the people you love most may not always act with care, And that sometimes protecting yourself requires distance, even from those you once trusted, even from those you once believed would always choose you. But I have also learned that chosen family exists, that allies, friends, and supporters can be as strong or stronger than blood, that loyalty, love, and trust can come from unexpected places, and that surrounding yourself with people who believe in you can transform pain into purpose. I have learned the power of voice. When I shared my story, people listened. They saw not a confused old woman, but a human being with courage, clarity, and integrity. Millions reached out to say, "We've been through this too," and in their voices, I found connection, hope, and healing. I have learned that standing up for yourself is never selfish. It is not pride, it is survival. It is teaching others, silently and boldly, that no one has the right to diminish your worth. And sometimes it is the only way to save your soul. I have learned that recovery takes time. It is not instant. It is not linear. There are days of doubt, days when memories sting, days when old fears resurface. But each day, each step forward, builds resilience. Each act of courage strengthens the foundation of your life. I have learned that purpose can emerge from pain. The foundation, the workshops, the book, they all began because of what I endured. But now they exist for others, for seniors reclaiming homes, finances, and confidence, for people learning to set boundaries and protect themselves, for a community that needs to see that change is possible. I have learned that forgiveness is complicated. I do not need to reconcile with those who hurt me. I do not need to condone the actions that caused me pain. But I can forgive myself for moments of doubt. I can forgive myself for being hurt, and I can choose peace over resentment. I have learned that life is fragile, that each day is precious, and that time lost to fear or silence is time that can never be regained. So I choose to live boldly, to act with intention, to cherish moments of connection, joy, and growth. And finally, I have learned that legacy matters. Not the wealth we accumulate, not the possessions we leave behind, but the lives we touch, the courage we inspire, the knowledge we share. I have built a life that matters, a life that continues beyond me. Through the foundation, the workshops, the guidance, the stories, the hope we provide, and in that I find fulfillment. Sometimes I sit quietly in my home, thinking about the journey. I think about the wedding night, the slap, the disbelief, the heartbreak, and I smile softly because I know that every moment led to this, to strength, to independence, to purpose, to a life rebuilt on dignity, respect, and courage. If there is one thing I hope my story teaches others, it is this: you are never too old to reclaim your life. You are never too powerless to stand up, and you are never too late to find purpose, peace, and strength. So, to anyone listening, feeling alone, unheard, or pressured by family or circumstances, know this: your voice matters, your boundaries matter, your dignity matters. Stand firm, protect yourself, seek support, and know that by doing so, you are not just surviving, you are creating a life worth living. I have learned that happiness and fulfillment do not come from the approval of others. They come from living in alignment with your values, from helping others, from reclaiming what is rightfully yours, from embracing your worth and refusing to surrender it. And as I continue my work, my foundation, and my advocacy, I do so with calm determination. I do so with quiet pride, and I do so knowing that the journey of pain has transformed into a journey of hope. Life is not perfect. Families do not always reconcile. Mistakes happen. People hurt each other, but peace is possible. Strength is possible. Courage is possible. And in reclaiming your life, protecting your dignity, and helping others to do the same, you create a legacy that matters. As we come to the end of this story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening, for sitting with me through moments of pain, reflection, and courage. Stories like this are not always easy to hear, but they remind us that strength can come from the most unexpected places. If this story touched you, or if it reminded you of someone you know, please consider showing your support. A simple like helps these quiet stories reach people who may need to hear them most. And subscribing to the channel ensures that you won't miss any more real-life stories about family, love, resilience, and hope. Remember, you are not alone in your struggles. You are human, and feeling deeply is a sign of strength, not weakness. Every act of courage, every choice to protect yourself, every moment of kindness matters. Thank you for giving me your time, your attention, and your heart. It means more than words can express. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we continue sharing stories that inspire, heal, and empower.